The gavel cracked against the mahogany block like a thunderclap, and the federal courtroom fell into a restless hush. Reporters perched at the edge of their seats, pens hovering over notepads, hungry for the spectacle unfolding before them. The gallery buzzed with whispered speculation, the stale air thick with tension and the faint metallic scent of fear. District Attorney Victor Sterling strode before the jury like a lion claiming his territory, his voice rising with theatrical outrage as he painted James Cole as a mastermind terrorist, a quiet predator who had hidden in plain sight. His tailored suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his smirk radiated absolute certainty. But the camera found James, stoic, serene, a figure carved from ancient patience. His hands rested motionless on the defense table, his dark eyes unreadable, his dignity an impenetrable fortress against the storm raging around him. In that charged silence, the battle lines were drawn. Long before the gavel fell and the cameras flashed, James Cole lived a life of quiet purpose in a modest brick home on Cedar Street. The porch creaked under his weight each morning as he stepped outside to tend his garden, his calloused hands nurturing tomato vines with the same patience he had once applied to far more dangerous work. He was the elder who sat on the church's front pew every Sunday, his deep voice joining the hymns with humble devotion. Young men from the neighborhood sought his counsel on everything from job applications to troubled marriages, drawn to his calm wisdom and the steady light in his weary eyes. He fixed bicycles, grilled burgers for block parties, and never spoke of the briefcase hidden in the back of his closet. Inside that worn leather case lay a faded badge, a handful of medals wrapped in tissue paper, and photographs of a younger James standing alongside men who now ran intelligence agencies. He had retired from government service 2 decades ago, trading classified briefings for sermons and covert operations for community service. The neighbors knew him as a kind man, a gentle soul. They had no idea that the quietest person in their midst had once been the most dangerous operative alive. 3 weeks before the courtroom spectacle, Victor Sterling sat in his corner office, overlooking the Federal Plaza, his polished Oxfords propped against a mahogany desk cluttered with case files. His ambition was a visible hunger behind his calculating eyes, a man who measured success not in justice served but in headlines earned. Across from him, an FBI agent shifted uncomfortably as Sterling flipped through the thin file on James Cole. "This is all you have?" Sterling's voice dripped with contempt. The agent stammered about insufficient evidence, shaky witness testimony, and a reluctant informant. Sterling silenced him with a raised hand. "The public needs a win," he declared, his tone brooking no argument. "We'll manufacture what we need. Entrapment, coercion. I don't care how you get it done." He pushed the file back across the desk, his arrogance solidifying into corruption. "Make him a terrorist. Give me a conviction." The agent hesitated, but Sterling's cold stare left no room for conscience. The machinery of injustice was set in motion, fueled by ambition and lubricated by disdain for due process. Victor Sterling would have his trophy, and James Cole would become his stepping stone to glory. The morning sun had barely crested the rooftops when James Cole pulled his sedan into the grocery store parking lot. Before he could turn off the engine, the world erupted. A dozen FBI agents swarmed his vehicle like wolves, descending on wounded prey, their black jackets and tactical gear a blur of menace against the innocent daylight. They wrenched his door open, slammed his face against the steering wheel, and yanked his arms behind his back with practiced brutality. Cameras rolled from multiple angles, capturing every second of the spectacle for the narrative Sterling had already written. Inside James's trunk, agents discovered the manufactured evidence, a handwritten essay on civil liberties that Sterling's office had painstakingly edited into a terrorist manifesto. Each benign sentence twisted into a call for violence. The undercover informant, a troubled man Sterling had coerced with threats of prosecution, had been meticulously coached for months, fed scripts that painted James as an eager co-conspirator. When James had tried to walk away from the informant's suggestions, the agents had escalated, refusing to accept any refusal, any way out. They followed their script with religious devotion. James Cole was not arrested for a crime he committed. He was arrested for a crime Sterling had manufactured from nothing but ambition and malice. Sterling circled the jury box like a shark scenting blood, his voice rising to a theatrical crescendo that commanded every eye in the gallery. He held up the fabricated manifesto as if it were a smoking gun, his fingers trembling with manufactured outrage. "This man," Sterling thundered, jabbing an accusatory finger at James. "This traitor wore the uniform of our nation while plotting its destruction. Decades of service, a cover, a mask for sinister motives that would make our founding fathers weep." The reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against notepads like hungry insects feeding on a carcass. Cameras flashed, capturing James's stoic face for the evening news, where talking heads would dissect his character and find him guilty before the jury even deliberated. Sterling paraded his witnesses, his manufactured evidence, his carefully constructed narrative of treason and betrayal. He turned to James with a triumphant sneer, expecting to see the man crumble, to witness the breaking of a spirit that had survived wars and secrets that would never be declassified. But James remained silent, his hands motionless on the defense table, his back straight as a soldier's. Only one thing betrayed him: a single tear that traced a slow, deliberate path down his weathered cheek. It was not a tear of weakness, but of profound sorrow for a system he had once sworn to protect, now corrupted by a man who wore ambition like a crown. The world James had built lay in ruins around him, and yet he did not break. He simply waited, as he had always waited, knowing that patience was the deadliest weapon of all. In the cold confines of the holding cell, James Cole's stoic mask finally cracked. His knuckles whitened against the steel bench, and something ancient and dangerous flickered behind his dark eyes, a controlled fury that had been dormant for 2 decades but never truly extinguished. He requested a single phone call, and when the connection was made, the voice on the other end belonged to a man whose name still commanded hushed reverence in Washington corridors. "They've made a mistake," James said, his voice low and steady, each word measured like a blade being sharpened. "It's time for me to stop playing the game." The warning was dispatched through channels Sterling could not see, a ripple spreading through the intelligence community like shockwaves from a distant earthquake. Across town, Sterling was reviewing his victory speech when his private line rang. The voice on the other end was frantic, a senior official who rarely showed fear. "Sterling, you've bitten off more than you can chew. This man is not who you think he is." Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, his arrogance a fortress against reason. "He's just a janitor's son," he scoffed, dismissing the warning with a wave of his hand. A retired nobody with delusions of grandeur. He hung up and returned to his speech, utterly blind to the storm gathering on his horizon. The night before the verdict descended upon the federal courthouse, like a shroud of anticipation. James Cole sat in his cell, the fluorescent hum his only companion, when the heavy steel door groaned open to admit a figure from his past. The former director of the agency moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had once commanded armies of shadows. He settled across from James, his voice barely a whisper. "They don't know who you are," he said, his eyes glinting with something between admiration and dread. James nodded slowly. That was the point of retirement. The truth hung between them like smoke. James Cole was not merely a retired agent, but a living legend, the architect of the most successful secretive undercover operations in agency history. He had dismantled cartels, toppled dictators, and walked through fire while wearing 100 different faces. The men who had framed him, including Sterling, had no idea they had targeted the most feared operative to ever draw a government paycheck. Now the hidden power was no longer hidden. James produced a slim folder from beneath his mattress, containing documentation that would expose Sterling's misuse of FBI resources and the entire entrapment operation. "Tomorrow," James said, his voice calm as still water, "I stop being the victim. Tomorrow, I become the hunter." The judge's gavel fell, and the courtroom fell into a breathless silence. Does the defendant have anything to say before the jury deliberates? The question hung in the air like a challenge. James Cole rose from his chair, and something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere. He removed his glasses with deliberate slowness, folded them, and placed them on the defense table. His fingers straightened his tie with the precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. When he spoke, his voice was not the meek, compliant tone from the previous weeks. It was authoritative, resonant, the voice of a man who had commanded men in life or death situations. "Your Honor," he began, his eyes sweeping the courtroom with calm authority, "I would like to present new evidence." Sterling shot to his feet, his face contorting with outrage. "This is highly irregular. Objection." The judge raised a hand, silencing him, his expression one of dawning curiosity. James produced a slim folder from his jacket, its contents meticulously organized for this exact moment. He began to speak, his words a surgical blade dissecting the FBI's sting operation. He exposed every flaw, every contradiction, every manufactured piece of evidence. He presented documents that revealed Sterling's personal directive to get a conviction, no matter what. Recordings played of Sterling coaching the informant, feeding him lines, constructing a narrative from nothing but ambition. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Sterling's face drained of color, his confident smirk replaced by a mask of pure horror. "This is a trick," he screamed, his composure shattering. "Objection, this is all fabricated." But the judge was frozen, his eyes fixed on James, and then James reached into the folder and produced his old credentials, worn and faded, but unmistakably authentic. "My name," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of decades, "is James Cole, retired Director of Special Operations, and I was targeted because I knew the truth about a botched operation that would have exposed this prosecutor's corruption years ago." The mask was off. The courtroom held its collective breath as the legend revealed himself, and Victor Sterling's world collapsed around him. The courtroom erupted into pandemonium. Reporters leaped from their seats, their carefully maintained composure dissolving into a frenzy of shouted questions and frantic note-taking. Federal marshals moved with swift, practiced efficiency, their hands clamping onto Victor Sterling's arms before he could reach the door. "You can't do this," Sterling shrieked, his voice cracking with desperation, his polished facade crumbling into something pathetic and small. "I have appeals. I have connections. You'll all pay for this." His protests echoed off the mahogany walls as they dragged him from the courtroom, his expensive shoes scuffing against the marble floor, his arrogance finally stripped away to reveal the desperate man beneath. The cameras captured every moment of his humiliation, every tear of rage that streaked his crimson face. Across the room, James Cole stood motionless, watching his tormentors exit with neither triumph nor pity, only the quiet satisfaction of a man who had restored balance to an unbalanced world. The judge signed the release papers with trembling hands, and James walked out of the courthouse into the blinding glare of afternoon sun. The same reporters who had vilified him now surged forward like a tidal wave, microphones thrust toward his face, questions tumbling over each other in a desperate bid for his story. James paused, his eyes scanning the crowd with that same unreadable calm. A slow, sorrowful smile touched his lips, not of victory, but of melancholy for what had been lost. Without a single word, he slipped into the back of a waiting black sedan, and the car disappeared into the flow of traffic, leaving the spectacle behind. In the months that followed, the machinery of justice ground forward with relentless precision. Victor Sterling's name became a cautionary tale whispered in legal circles, his once bright political aspirations reduced to ashes. The State Bar Association moved swiftly, stripping him of his license to practice law, his reputation shattered beyond repair. He stood before a federal judge, his expensive suits replaced by prison orange, his arrogance finally extinguished, and received a sentence that would keep him behind bars for more than a decade. The FBI agents who had participated in the entrapment operation were quietly terminated. Their careers ended not with a bang but with a whispered dismissal, their names forever stained by association with Sterling's corruption. The media narrative performed a complete reversal, the same outlets that had vilified James Cole now running glowing profiles of the hero who was framed, the legend who had returned from retirement to expose a corrupt system. James Cole, however, retreated to his modest home on Cedar Street, returning to his garden, his church, his quiet life of purpose. But he was no longer just a man, he had become a symbol. One autumn evening, a young FBI agent appeared at his door, nervous and uncertain, seeking the wisdom of the legend. James invited him inside, offering tea and patience. The young man spoke of his disillusionment, his fear that the system was broken beyond repair. James listened, then placed a weathered hand on the young man's shoulder. "Integrity isn't about power," he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a lifetime. "It's about using your power to protect the innocent, not to destroy them. Remember that, and you'll never lose your way." The young agent left with renewed purpose, and James returned to his garden, content in the knowledge that the seeds of justice, once planted, would continue to grow. The autumn sunlight streamed through the stained glass window of the small church on Cedar Street, casting fractured rainbows across the wooden pews where James Cole sat in quiet contemplation. The window depicted Lady Justice, her scales balanced, her sword sheathed, her eyes blindfolded, not in ignorance, but in impartiality. James's lips moved in a silent prayer, not of vengeance for what had been done to him, but of gratitude for the truth that had finally been allowed to surface. His hands rested on the worn wooden pew, the same hands that had once dismantled empires and now gently tended tomato vines. There was no bitterness in his heart, no desire for revenge beyond what justice had already delivered. There was only peace, hard-won and deeply earned. He rose slowly, his joints protesting the years, and walked toward the door. Pausing at the threshold, he turned back to look at the stained glass window one last time, his eyes reflecting the colored light. "They thought they could silence me," he whispered to the empty sanctuary, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of secrets and service. "But they forgot the most important thing." A small, knowing smile touched his lips. They framed the wrong man. He stepped out into the golden afternoon light, the door closing softly behind him, leaving only the echo of a legend who had finally found his peace. What would you have done if you were in James's shoes? Would you have had the patience to wait, the courage to endure, the wisdom to strike only when the time was right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in justice, if you believe that bullies should always be held accountable, then like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs to see it. Hit the bell icon so you never miss another tale of poetic justice delivered. The underdog doesn't always win, but when they do, it's a story worth telling. And we have many more waiting for you. Subscribe now.